There is a plant growing between sidewalk cracks that carries more omega-3 fatty acids per leaf than salmon. It thrives without fertilizer. It survives drought that kills crops. And most people spend their lives trying to destroy it. Farmers spray it. Gardeners rip it out. Cities poison it. Yet gram for gram, it outperforms some of the most celebrated superfoods on Earth. It does not need rich soil. It does not need permission. And it does not need us. By every nutritional rule we are taught, this plant should be cultivated, protected, and valued. Instead, it is classified as a weed. That contradiction is not accidental, because when something feeds people too easily, too freely, and too reliably, it stops being useful to systems built on control. It cannot be patented. It cannot be monopolized. It cannot be made scarce on demand, so it is renamed, redefined, treated as a problem to be erased. Most people walk past it without seeing food, without seeing medicine, without seeing resilience growing at their feet. And that blindness is learned. This is not just a story about a plant. It is a story about what we are taught to ignore, about how abundance becomes invisible when it doesn't fit the system. If this kind of forgotten survival knowledge matters to you, take a second to like this video and subscribe. It helps keep these stories alive and reaching the people who need them. Stay with me. What you're about to hear could change how you see survival. When food systems work, we forget how fragile they are. Supermarkets feel permanent. Supply chains feel invisible. Calories arrive wrapped in plastic, trucked from thousands of miles away. But those systems are thin. They depend on fuel, on refrigeration, on stable weather, on centralized control. History shows us what happens when even one of those pillars breaks. Drought collapses, grain harvests. War cuts trade routes. Inflation prices protein out of reach. Climate instability turns monoculture fields into liabilities overnight. In those moments, survival no longer belongs to the most advanced system. It belongs to the most adaptable one. Adaptability is not efficiency. It is redundancy. It is diversity. It is the ability to function when conditions are wrong. Modern food systems are optimized for profit during stability. They are brittle under stress. Fields planted with a single crop fail together. Supply chains snap at their weakest link. Cities discover they are only days away from shortage. Plants that demand perfect soil fail first. Plants that require constant inputs disappear. Plants bred for uniformity collapse together. But wild foods do not. They do not wait for markets. They do not rely on fertilizer factories. They do not ask whether conditions are ideal. They grow anyway. They fill gaps when fields fail. They feed people when distribution stops. They turn overlooked land into calories. And among them is a plant so nutritionally dense, so resilient, that it should be part of every survival conversation. Instead, it's dismissed as a nuisance. That omission matters, because when systems fail, ignorance becomes hunger. Long before nutrition labels existed, humans learned which plants kept them alive. Not through studies, through survival. One of those plants was purslane, Portulaca oleracea. It spread with human migration across Africa, Asia, the Middle East, Europe, and the Americas. Not because it was invasive, but because people carried it with them, intentionally or unknowingly, as a living insurance policy. Ancient Egyptians cultivated it along the Nile, where flooding and drought alternated unpredictably. Greek physicians prescribed it for inflammation, wounds, and digestive imbalance. Traditional Chinese medicine classified it as a cooling plant, used to calm heat in the body and restore balance during illness. Hippocrates mentioned it. Dioscorides cataloged it, not as folklore, but as practice. Indigenous cultures across continents gathered it as a dependable green when nothing else survived heat, poor soil, or neglect. It was not ceremonial. It was practical. It was food when food was uncertain. In Mexico, it became verdolagas, cooked slowly with meat or eggs to stretch scarce protein. In the Mediterranean, it was eaten raw with olive oil and vinegar, valued for its crisp texture and sustaining qualities. In the Middle East, it was dried, stored, and rehydrated when crops failed and fresh greens vanished. It earned names that translated to little strength or powerful green. Not because it looked impressive, but because it delivered energy when energy mattered most. It grew fast. It regenerated when cut. It held moisture in its leaves like a living reservoir. And when times were hard, it fed people quietly, without ceremony, without dependence. That kind of plant does not disappear by accident. When formal agriculture falters, weeds become food again. During droughts in the Middle East, rural families returned to purslane growing wild along irrigation ditches, harvesting it early in the morning before the heat drained its moisture. During famine years in parts of Europe, it supplemented diets when bread thinned and fields produced little more than straw. During the Great Depression, families foraged without naming it, feeding children with what lawns rejected and sidewalks ignored. In war zones, it survived shelling and neglect. In refugee conditions, it grew where gardens could not, along tent edges, broken pavement, compacted ground stripped of nutrients. Its advantage was not taste. It was certainty. Purslane does not bolt in heat. It does not demand rain. It thrives in compacted soil where crops fail. Even when trampled, it returns. Even when cut, it regrows. Even when forgotten, it waits. And nutritionally, it carried something rare. Omega-3 fatty acids, specifically alpha-linolenic acid, in concentrations higher than almost any other leafy green. In some measurements, higher per gram than certain fish. Alongside that, vitamin A to protect vision, vitamin C to support immunity, magnesium and potassium to stabilize muscles and nerves, iron to sustain oxygen flow when diets collapsed, antioxidants that reduce cellular damage under stress. In survival terms, it offered anti-inflammatory fats when meat was scarce, electrolytes when dehydration threatened, micronutrients when diets narrowed dangerously. It did not save lives dramatically. It saved them quietly, consistently, one meal at a time. Enough times that people remembered, until they were taught not to. Modern agriculture does not reward resilience. It rewards predictability. Uniform height, uniform harvest times, uniform response to chemicals. Purslane refuses all three. It sprawls low to the ground. It matures unevenly. It thrives without inputs. You cannot easily mechanize its harvest. You cannot patent its genetics. You cannot sell seeds year after year because one plant produces thousands on its own. It spreads whether invited or not. That makes it dangerous, not biologically, but economically. Industrial systems labeled it a weed because weeds do not ask permission. They compete with crops designed to depend on fertilizers. They undermine the narrative that food must be bought. They expose how fragile monocultures really are. So language changed. Nutritious became invasive. Resilient became undesirable. Free became worthless. Once that framing took hold, generations learned to destroy what could have fed them. Not through conspiracy, through convenience. Chemical control was easier than education. Monocultures were easier than diversity. Short-term yield was easier than long-term resilience. Agricultural policy followed machinery, not biology. Research funding followed profitability, not nourishment. Land management favored crops that fit spreadsheets, not ecosystems. Plants like purslane did not disappear because they failed. They disappeared because they succeeded without permission. They reminded people that food can grow without invoices, that nutrition does not require branding, that survival does not always align with markets, and anything that quietly undermines dependence is treated as a problem to be solved. It is easier to spray than to rethink systems. Modern research eventually caught up. Studies confirmed purslane as one of the richest plant sources of omega-3 fatty acids, particularly alpha-linolenic acid, an essential fat the human body cannot produce on its own. Its antioxidant capacity rivaled, and in some cases exceeded, that of cultivated greens promoted as superfoods. Its mucilaginous compounds were shown to support gut lining integrity and microbial balance. Its tolerance to salinity and drought outperformed many commercial crops bred for ideal conditions. Scientists noted its cam-like photosynthesis behavior, closing stomata during heat to conserve water, a strategy shared by desert-adapted plants. Agronomists studied its ability to grow in marginal soils without yield collapse, even where heavy metals or compaction limited other species. Nutritionists acknowledged its role in reducing systemic inflammation and supporting cardiovascular health, particularly in populations with limited access to fish. In controlled comparisons, purslane often matched or exceeded spinach, kale, and lettuce in micronutrient density, while requiring a fraction of the water and no fertilizer inputs. It was efficient where efficiency actually mattered. But there was a problem. It did not fit the market. It spoiled quickly. It bruised easily. It did not stack neatly or travel long distances without loss. It resisted standardization. Supply chains prefer crops that tolerate neglect in transit. Markets favor foods that look identical under fluorescent lights. Nutrition becomes secondary to logistics. So despite the data, purslane remained sidelined. Science could confirm its value, but systems built on scale, shelf life, and uniformity could not monetize its independence. What survives best in nature does not always survive commerce. Climate change does not care about branding. Heat waves will intensify, water scarcity will expand, soils will degrade. The crops that dominate global calories today were bred for stability that no longer exists. They assume predictable seasons, cheap fuel, constant irrigation, and chemical support. When those assumptions fail, so do the crops. In that future, survival will favor plants that evolved for chaos. Plants like purslane. It stores water in its leaves, not in reservoirs that can run dry. It grows where nothing else will. Cracked concrete, compacted soil, forgotten ground. It feeds humans without asking for infrastructure, refrigeration, or global transport. It does not replace agriculture. It supplements resilience. And that distinction matters, because survival is not about abundance alone. It is about options. Options rooted in biology, not supply chains. Options that persist when systems pause, fracture, or collapse. Options that return year after year without permission. Purslane teaches a quiet lesson. Nature repeats everywhere. What we label as a problem is often a solution that does not fit our systems. What we call a weed is often a survivor. As climates shift and stability fades, knowledge like this will resurface, not because it is trendy, but because it works. If this kind of forgotten survival knowledge matters to you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Roots of Survival. It helps keep these stories alive and shared with those who need them. We did not lose this knowledge, we forgot it. And forgetting is not final.